few secrets to tell you about travel insurance. So I wanted to get this out quick because this is really important. It's one of the most frequent questions we get about travel and cruising especially. And I tell people, look, when you're considering buying travel insurance or consider skipping it, you have to figure a couple of things. Number one, humans are incredibly fragile and things happen. Life is unpredictable. So travel insurance, what can it do for you? It can protect your finances. It offers financial protection against unexpected travel disruptions. I mean, medical emergencies, lost belongings, things like that. Or sometimes if you just change your mind or life circumstances come up and you have to cancel your trip, you don't want to lose all the money you had to prepay because nobody accepts cash at the gate. You know what I mean? So let's talk about, to put this in perspective, let's talk about a few real life examples of people who went on a cruise and decided to skip the travel insurance. They didn't need it. What happened to them? Did they regret it? A couple was enjoying their honeymoon cruise when the husband suffered a sudden heart attack. No heart history, no problems whatsoever. The medical team on the ship stabilized him, but he needed to be airlifted to a hospital to save his life in the nearest port. Because they didn't have travel insurance, they had to pay about $20,000 for onboard medical care and $68,000 for that helicopter to get them to the hospital with an emergency evacuation. If they had emergency medical evacuation coverage, which is offered by most travel insurance, they would have paid for the airlift and hospital treatment and saved them $88,000. How about a family of four who had a flight delay for an Alaska cruise due to bad weather, which caused them to miss the cruise departure? The cruise line refused to refund their tickets. It's not their fault, and they had to book last-minute flights to the next port at their own expense. So they had to pay about $5,000 for rebooking flights out of their own pocket to meet the cruise ship at the next port. A missed connection coverage would have reimbursed them for flights and accommodations with the right policy. How about this passenger on a Mediterranean cruise who caught norovirus and had to be quarantined in their cabin for 5 days? They missed their prepaid shore excursions. They had to book a new flight home due to travel restrictions, and they ended up losing $1,500 in non-refundable excursions and $1,000 for last-minute flight changes. Trip interruption or travel delay coverage might have reimbursed them for those losses. A group of friends pre-booked an expensive scuba diving excursion for about $1,200 in the Bahamas. But unfortunately, due to rough seas, the cruise line canceled that port stop. The tour operator said, hey, that's not my problem. He refused to issue a refund, and they were out of luck and out of $1,200. But cancel for any reason coverage might have covered those non-refundable prepaid activities. How about a traveler who went to Hawaii? They checked their luggage. It was lost by the airline en route to the cruise departure city. It happens. So the cruise left before the airline could deliver the bags, leaving the traveler without clothes or essentials for 5 days. The couple had to spend $600 or so on clothing, toiletry, and shoes on board, which is pretty cheap, actually. Baggage delay coverage would have reimbursed them for necessary purchases. How about a passenger who went on an ATV excursion in Cozumel and crashed, suffered a broken leg? It's terrible. The cruise left without them, and they had to get treatment at a local hospital. Their U.S. health insurance did not cover foreign medical expenses, and leaving them with a $30,000 bill. Travel medical insurance would have covered that hospital bill and probably arranged a flight home for them. How about a couple's Caribbean cruise canceled due to an approaching hurricane, but the cruise line only offered credit for a future trip and not a refund? But the couple had non-refundable flights and hotel stays booked before the cruise, which they couldn't cancel. They lost about $2,000 in flights and hotels. Trip cancellation coverage might have provided a cash refund instead of just a cruise credit. So the moral of the story is travel insurance may be worth it in certain circumstances. Especially for medical emergencies, which are unexpected and very costly at sea, as you heard about in the news, or abroad in other countries where your primary medical insurance may not cover what's going on. Flight delays, misconnections, it happens. There are things that are out of your control due to weather or whatever. Things happen. Passengers being unruly can delay a flight or turn a flight around. Lost luggage or valuables. It happens. Things get lost. Things get stolen through no fault of your own. There's just things beyond your control. And there are always unexpected trip cancellations or interruptions. So those things happen too. So the big question is, Do you need travel insurance? Well, it depends. Look, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a licensed insurance broker. I have no skin in this game. This is generic information and not advice. If you want real advice, legal advice, talk to an attorney or a licensed insurance agent and they'll give you the full rundown. And things change and vary by state too. So depending on what your state is, you may have different coverage limitations and whatnot. So here in Florida, we have different insurance regulations than New York, and the policies are two different policies and are written by two different carriers because some people don't write in different states. So you really need to talk or at least review the coverage in each state, the state that you live in or the state that you're departing from. But here's my thoughts as a fellow traveler. I'll share these with you. Say you're 20-something years old. You don't care about anything. You live in a rundown rental and your car payment is like twice the amount you're paying for rent, right? You probably will risk skipping buying travel insurance. I know I did. I didn't care. Or if you're the type of person who spends more time in the casino than average people and you seem to win all the time, well, maybe your luck is really good. Who knows? But if you're someone like in your 40s and now you own a home, you have some assets, then wouldn't you want to protect your finances and your assets? So here's a detailed breakdown of what's typically covered in travel insurance, and that's for cruises, for flights. And I'll tell you at the end of this video, stick around for that, which policy we bought and why. And that's really interesting information. I'm going to save you a ton of money, so hang around for that. So these are the average policy payouts. I mean, it varies by state and by policy, and there's common limitations too. Again, they vary widely. It doesn't apply to all policies, but you can read your policy carefully and you'll know what's covered and what is not covered by reading that policy or talking to a licensed insurance agent. Number one, trip cancellation and trip interruption insurance. That covers prepaid non-refundable trip expenses if you have to cancel or cut your trip short for covered reasons such as illness, injury, or death of you or a travel companion or an immediate family member. And there's different definitions for all that, so read your policy. It can cover reimburse prepaid non-refundable trip expenses for severe weather like hurricanes or blizzards where you can't get to the ship or something's canceled. Unforeseen work obligations, like if you have a military deployment or you get stuck in jury duty, it happens. How about bankruptcy of your airline or travel provider? That can happen too. Or a home emergency such as a fire or a flood or a burglary or something. The average payout in those situations, and you have to read your policy carefully, is typically 100% of your insured trip cost, and that varies again by policy. So do some reading on that, find out what's covered in your situation. Now, there are limitations. You can't just do this willy-nilly. You can't fake it. So you have to provide documented proof of reason for cancellation, which may include a doctor's note, a death certificate, a police report, depending on your situation and what you're telling people will happen. They're not going to pay anything without proper legal documentation. You can't fake it because that's fraud and you can go to prison for that. And most trip cancellation doesn't cover change of mind insurance. You know what I mean? So if you just change your mind, you decide you don't want to go for some willy-nilly because, hey, it's Tuesday, I don't feel like going on a cruise. It happens. I don't know. But there's a lot of things you cannot cancel your trip for, a lot of uncovered things. But you can add CFAR coverage. It's called cancel for any reason coverage. And it's a little bit more on top of it. I just priced a policy. It's about $31 extra. And that will reimburse not 100%, but somewhere between 50 to 75%, more like 50% of any prepaid travel expenses. So that's a nice coverage to have if you're kind of flighty or if you decide, hey, I'm having a bad day, I don't feel like going on a cruise next week. You're not going to get all your money back, but you might not lose everything with CFAR coverage, which again is usually a rider or an addition to an existing travel insurance policy. So keep that in mind. How about travel medical insurance? This pays for emergency medical expenses if you get sick or injured while you're traveling. It covers like hospitalization, doctor's visits, some medication, ambulance services, and some will include emergency dental care. I'm finding limitations of about $500. So don't think, hey, man, my tooth's kind of hurting. I'm going to go to Mexico and get a root canal while I'm on my cruise. They're not going to cover that kind of stuff. Or they'll cover it up to $500, but you might run into some walls there. And they tend to not cover pre-existing too. The average payout on those types of policies is somewhere between $50,000 to $500,000. So there's a nice wide swath of funds available for that, and it can get kind of pricey depending on where you are. And the average payout for dental, I'm seeing mostly $500, but some policies will write up to $1,000. So keep that in mind. Now, pre-existing conditions, meaning if you had some sort of terrible ailment and you got on the ship while you were sick, and some doctor treated you for that before you got on the ship and say you really shouldn't cruise, they may not cover that. Like if you have you're seconds away from a heart attack and you decide to cruise anyway and you just left the hospital, they may request those medical records, and yes, they can get them through a subpoena, and they may not pay that because of that. Unless you purchase a waiver. There's a waiver available for pre-existing, which says, all right, I'm going to cover anything. If you just walked out of a hospital with a heart attack, I'm going to pay you for that anyway. So, and also routine checkups and elective procedures aren't covered typically. So you can't just get a physical on a cruise ship because you feel like it. It just doesn't work that way. Also, most policies don't cover active pregnancy. So if you're 9 months pregnant, you're like, oh, I'll have this baby on the cruise, they're probably not going to cover that too. Typically falls under pre-existing and probably may not be covered under that, but read your policy just in case. It also covers emergency medical evacuation and repatriation. This is a worst case scenario, but I know people who have actually used this. This is emergency transport to the nearest adequate medical facility if you're seriously ill or injured. I saw this happen in Norway. They actually brought a helicopter onto the ship, airlifted somebody up and took him to a hospital in Norway. She's doing great now. That's great. She shared everything on her Facebook page. She was thankful for all the pictures and videos all the people took, which is, kind of, whether you agree with that or not, is really interesting to see that process. And also, they will cover, some policies will cover medical repatriation, meaning that they will transport you back to your home country for treatment. If you don't have this insurance, it might be on your own, and your personal health insurance back here at home may not cover that. And also, somebody we know had a husband who died of a heart attack in Mexico while on a cruise. And her insurance covered returning the remains, the coffin and the body to the United States so they could have a proper funeral here. So, and that could be kind of really expensive too. I think she said it was $15,000. This was years ago. And the insurance picked that up and covered that. So that's great. So the average evacuation claim limits are somewhere between $100,000 and $1 million, typically are in the neighborhood of $500,000. Which should cover most repatriation and evacuation back to your home country, even in a medical situation where you have to fly with a doctor. Now, it must be deemed medically necessary by the insurance provider. So whoever you buy that insurance policy for, you're going to need to call them or have somebody call them and get a pre-authorization. So you need to call them up, say, hey, we're having this situation happen on a ship. We need to bring somebody back home. You're going to approve this, and they'll write it up and send that. If you don't do that, it may be denied. So always keep that number with you. It'd be an 800 number on the back of the card or the documents if you do purchase travel insurance, and have somebody who can call them, but hopefully in advance of any treatment. Now, it will also cover, in a lot of cases, baggage and personal belongings. So if your luggage is lost or stolen, like that couple who went to Hawaii, or if it's damaged, your personal items are damaged, it will cover you for that kind of stuff. It'll cover you for delayed baggage, allowing you to buy essentials like clothes and toiletries. And lost and stolen baggage typically pay somewhere between $500 to $3,000 per traveler. So it's a nice allowance. You can get yourself some MK stuff, some nice clothes and shoes stuff if they happen to get lost in your baggage. Most of these things have per item limits, meaning there's like $300 per item or max of $500 for electronics. So if you do lose your laptop, you're only going to get up to like $500 for your laptop. If you've got like a very expensive laptop, they're probably not going to cover the entire replacement cost, but at least you'll get something. Otherwise, you get nothing out of that. It also covers travel delays like hotels, meals, and transportation if your trip is delayed due to severe weather, an airline strike, or mechanical issues. So that is something that can happen too. It'll cover you somewhere between $100 to $300 a day, typically maxes out between $500 and $2,000. It kicks in after a delay of 6 to 12 hours. So if it's like 2 hours late, you're not going to get anything, but they're talking about major delays. And you do have to submit a documentation of the delay and also receipts for reimbursement. And then there's the accidental death and dismemberment coverage, which a lot of policies offer. And this gives your beneficiary a lump sum payment if you die or if you suffer a severe injury. We're talking loss of a limb, or you lose your eyesight or hearing or something that's going to materially affect your life while you're traveling. The average payout somewhere between $10,000 to $500,000. If you die, it goes to your beneficiary. If you don't die, it goes to you to help cover medical expenses and adjusting your life for that terrible injury. It doesn't cover, these things do have some severe limitations though. So if you die due to illness, it's probably not going to cover it. It's only accidents. And these are accidents out of your control: suicide, alcohol injuries, or dumb things you did because you had a little too much to drink are not going to be covered. If you jumped over the railing and landed on your back and, you know what I mean, lost your arm or whatever, it's not going to be covered. So, and it also includes risky activities, stuff like skydiving and scuba diving, unless you buy adventure sports coverage for those type of things too. So there's always a rider available for anything at an additional cost. So another question: how much does travel insurance cost, and where should I buy it from? Now, the average cost is said to be somewhere between 4 to 10% of your total trip cost. So if you're doing for example, we're doing a $10,000 cruise, and our coverage for that, according to the cruise line, was going to be about, for both of us, for two of us, two adults over 50, it's about $750. So somewhere about that. That's floating at 7%, 7.5%. But it can be as low as 4%. And it can be as high as 10%, depending on the coverage you get, the riders you decide to get, and the company you go with. So it varies widely. So shop around, definitely. The cruise line we're going on, I'm not going to mention the name, but I can tell you that if you buy insurance from the cruise line, there's typically much better deals. Insurance sold by cruise lines is very convenient, but there's some problems with it. We don't do it either. We don't buy the insurance sold by the cruise ship. Why? Because it's a profit generator, number one. 30 to 50% of what you pay travel insurance for on a cruise goes to the cruise line. It's a huge profit center. Some guy said 8-10 years ago, hey, we should offer insurance. If we offer insurance, people typically buy it because we'll play on their fear because things could go bad, right? So what we did is we shopped around and bought our own insurance. Now, there's two ways you can do this. You can buy it per trip, or you can buy an annual policy. We buy an annual policy. Why? Because we cruise more than once a year. And actually, the annual policy we purchased was less. We bought a policy that had better, higher limits for everything, basically. Our coverage was a lot better on the policy we bought than what the cruise line was offering. And it was about $200 cheaper for the entire year. So you can take as many cruises as you want. I think the only limitations are your cruise or your trip can't last more than 30 to 45 days, and I have to read the policy. We never do that. I think our longest trip was like 18 to 21 days. But if you do that, you need to look at the policy and see what's available for you. So it's cheaper and it offers better coverage. I mean, the cruise companies don't like that. The insurance company doesn't care because they're getting their money no matter what. They're going to get more money from you paying them directly than they will splitting with the cruise line 50-50. You know what I mean? We also found you have better cancellation reasons and benefits if you buy it on your own. And there's better coverage for pre and post cruise expenses. Plus, if I decide to fly somewhere, I think they have limitations. Your trip has to be more than 100 miles from home, and your total trip has to include an overnight stay or be longer than 24 hours. So now if I drive to see my relatives in another state, that trip's also going to be covered under this type of insurance for accidents and health insurance and all that stuff. So it's nice that you have that additional coverage. If you fly somewhere, if you drive somewhere overnight and you're visiting people in different parts of the country, it's over a whole year. So it's going to cover all of those trips, which made a lot more sense to me. So again, $200 less, a lot better coverage, and an entire year of coverage. So shop around. There's a whole bunch of companies that offer it. If you have a local insurance agent, they may be able to help you out with that as well, but you can buy all this stuff online. The only limitations are there is a certain amount of time before your trip you have to buy this. I think it's a couple of weeks. I'm not sure. Check with your state and your insurance provider. You don't want to buy it the night before because you might not be able to get it. Just if you know you have a trip coming up in 60 days, pick it up now, and you can start. You can set your start date for the first day of your trip. So that's what we did. So we're not traveling until this certain day, and we set our first day for that day, and it covers an entire 365 days from that day forward. And again, we saved some money and got better coverage. So again, I have no skin in the game. I don't make any money from insurance. I am not an affiliate for any insurance company. I just want you to have the best information available. And if this helped you, hit that like and subscribe button. Comment if you have some other ideas or if something happened to you that you could have bought insurance. If you have regrets or if you have a story about how insurance helped you, definitely help everybody out because a rising tide lifts all ships. You know what I mean? Tim Cruz, I'm out. We'll see you on the open seas.